Do you feel stressed and anxious more often than not? Do you wish you could find a few simple strategies to help you get off the hamster wheel of anxiety and find greater ease, balance, and joy? I've found that many people feel chronically overwhelmed by the internal and external pressures and expectations that have become part of today's busy world. Well, I'm here to let you know that a few simple, mindful changes can help you shift your life for the better. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Pete Economou, who is an esteemed Rutgers professor and psychologist. He's also an author and performance consultant, and he will help us embrace some positive changes that will help you change your life for the better. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. I get anxious and stressed a lot. My parents always told me I'm high strung. I've tried meditation and yoga, but they don't calm me down. I think I'm a little ADD, and I want to know if you have strategies to help me focus and get a handle on my anxiety. And with that issue as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manly, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I am thrilled to be joined by a tremendous guest, Dr. Pete Economou, who is a psychologist, professor at the esteemed Rutgers University, author, and performance consultant. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Pete. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Carla. I already feel more calm just with your introduction. I love it.
Terrific. Well, welcome to the show. We aim to be a calming force in the world, this
Yes.
topsy-turvy world. So before we launch into the bread of today's podcast, do you mind telling our listeners just a little bit about what makes you you?
Yeah, well, that's such a deep question. I actually just finished a 2-day retreat in my Zen world, and so I'm nobody actually. That's a lot of what we do in Zen meditation. So after sitting for 2 days, you realize you're nobody. But I'm many identities, like you said, psychologist, a professor, performance consultant. I live. My vocation is just living to help people uh, contact life in the most full way, and then reach this zone that they want to get to. And we're all striving for something different, and that's what I love about it, because that's the art of what I do. There's no one size fits all, and so just trying to find that thing that somebody needs to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together.
I love that. That's beautiful. I also appreciate that you just said we're all striving for something different.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that the opposite of what Zen is all about?
Yeah, well, because you're striving for nothing really,
Yeah,
in the Zen world. But most listeners probably won't understand that unless you have a ton of Zen Buddhist practitioners listening. uh,
probably not. Probably most of us are striving for something, whether
yeah.
it's a better relationship, whether it's to not get stuck in that hamster wheel. I just thought it was funny because I have a she shed in my backyard and she's called Zazen.
Yeah.
And when I
Ah.
think of how my life is often very different from Zen, it is,
Yeah.
trying to be in that place of nothingness, of
Yeah.
going with that flow of just being. Yet our daily lives tend to call us to do something far different from that.
Yeah, and I'm in New York, and so in the New York area, one of the things you just said really struck with me, because a lot of the clients I work with, they're always striving for the next thing, actually. And then
Mm.
for in terms of relationship, it's really hard because they may have a great relationship, but they're like, I might have a better one. that I'm missing. Like it's that much of a achievement uh, gap, and that's why I say to people that I coach in New York area, dating's really hard in New York because you have these really high achieving people with this large pool. I don't. The pool might be a little distorted, but there is a large number of people. But they're always looking for the next best thing, and that really is also the antithesis of Zen.
Okay, have to pause here already. Even though we're not addressing the listener's question, you reminded me of the paradox of choice.
Yes, that's right.
That whole issue that when we have too many
Yeah.
choices,
Mhm.
whether it's people to date or houses to buy, or
Yes.
as in the paradox of choice study, too many options when it comes to jam in the supermarket.
Yes.
The idea of the paradox of choice is that when we have too many choices, not only do we tend to be less satisfied with the one we take home or the one we choose,
Yeah.
but we also tend to make fewer choices because, and I love that study
Yeah.
because when you set up the listeners, I'm describing the paradox of choice study where there was jam put in the supermarket, and one stand had just a few samples of jam, and the other had many samples of jam. And the one where there were many samples, people tended to buy less and
Yeah.
tended to be less satisfied. So I think what we're talking about here, whether it's dating or any other choices in life, when we flood ourselves with too many things to strive for, too many choices. That can be part of the anxiety and the overwhelm that happens. Do you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that study's wonderful. And I actually I changed the metaphor to jeans because a lot of people are going to buy jeans, like which cut, which color. It's the same thing. And then people don't like the way they look, and they like the way they look, and it's really just it's a metaphor for life. And yeah, so I thank you for sharing that study.
I appreciate that you have switched it to jeans because, yes, when you're in a store and there are too many jeans, or you order them by mail
Uh,
and you're looking at all the images and it's just, I don't know how. And so you end up clicking away and not doing anything or getting all of them and doing a massive return. So, bit of a
yeah,
waste of energy.
a bit of a waste of energy. And if we link it back to your listener's question about the hamster wheel and anxiety, anxiety really debilitates our, or it sort of paralyzes our ability to make decisions. People that are, when anxiety is driving the bus, all of us have difficulty with decisions, period. And, in 2024. But when anxiety is driving your bus, you will be paralyzed by making decisions. You think, if I choose that color for the wall, it is absolutely permanent, or the tile, which color to choose for the floor. And it feels like it's a lose lose. And you do feel like you're on a hamster wheel.
Thank you for mentioning that because in my clinical work as a psychologist, I often look at when I have a client who's really stuck in anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
I often help them see that that anxiety puts them on a ledge, so to speak,
Yeah.
and they have choice, and this is with only two choices, choice A on one side of the ledge and choice B. And when you're looking, oh, if I make a choice, I'm going to make a mistake. I'll get something wrong.
Yeah.
It won't be the best. The sheer amount of energy it takes to balance on that little ledge and be in that place of indecisiveness, that alone creates so much anxiety. And
Yeah.
pulling in, you're the mindfulness expert. You're trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. Listeners, we often hear that as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'll have, if Dr. Pete doesn't mind, I'll ask him to explain a little bit more about that
Sure.
because it is one of the most well-researched and highly effective forms of therapy, especially for treating anxiety. And so if we look at that image of being on this balance beam, so to speak, and not choosing A or B, one on the
Yeah.
other side, if you can imagine and feel in your body how much effort that takes just to
Mm.
stay there and realizing, well, if you choose A, it might not be the best choice, but you'll manage it. If you choose B, it might not be the best choice, but you'll learn from it. And then learning to be that mindful about our choices because most of the choices we make on a daily basis aren't life-threatening. We make so much out of them because we're
Yeah.
just these imperfect humans who are trying to do that best. And when
Yeah.
we let go of that ideal of needing to make that perfect choice.
Mm.
And if you're right, if we choose a wall color that's not perfect, okay, well, then that's an opportunity to paint over it next year and live with it a year. And we might learn that we love it. But when we realize that things don't have to be perfect, that it's
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
we have so much more grace and spaciousness in our lives.
Yeah.
So before we go any further, could you tell our listeners a little bit about CBT and why that's so important for mindfulness, anxiety reduction, stress reduction?
Yeah, so CBT, like you said, cognitive behavioral therapy. Sometimes we're called the cognitive cult by some other practitioners because, to your point, it is the most researched and evidence-based practice. That's why we get a bad name of it, because it's really the only, a bad name compared to some other sort of interventions, because we can manualize and really operationalize what we're doing. It's very science-based, and so in a very simple way, it's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And so there's like a triad between them. I always have like arrows kind of going from one to the next, and they all kind of relate with each other. And so I have a thought that kind of impacts how I feel, and that impacts how I behave, and vice versa. And usually we find cycles. And so if you're talking about anxiety and dating, you're going to find the cycle of what's the thought about the person that maybe I just went on a date with, what's the judgment around it, how does it make me feel, I feel a little insecure, and then I ghost the person, or I don't give it a chance to kind of maybe get to know someone. And so that's CBT, like as basic as possible. And it is the most, as I said, studied, and it's an evidence-based practice. And um, in terms of anxiety, one of the other things you said that really made me think was it's kind of like like if you go to the doctor and you have strep throat, if they don't give you an antibiotic or a throat swab, then what are they doing? That would actually be seen as like a negative treatment. And so if someone is really struggling with anxiety, and what I will say is anxiety is normal. And so when clients come into my office and they say I have anxiety, I say good, and they look at me, they're like, what? And I say, well, it's adaptive. Like you need it. It's kept us alive as a species. And so maybe you've developed a negative relationship with your anxiety. And so what we're going to do is kind of build a healthier relationship with it. But CBT has shown to be, and especially with mindfulness, mindfulness is just I kind of think of CBT is like the umbrella, and mindfulness is one of the interventions that's underneath that umbrella. So I can go into that if you'd like, and kind of how I got into that mindfulness world too.
Absolutely. Before we go into the mindfulness, because I am such a believer in mindfulness,
Yeah.
besides being a psychologist, yoga teacher, meditation leader, all of those things that play a part in
Mm-hmm.
keeping us regulated and balanced. But you were talking about that interplay,
Mm-hmm.
and with cognitive behavioral therapy, where, yes, I agree with you, anxiety is so important. We have optimal anxiety, and then
Mm-hmm.
we have anxiety that's working against us. And optimal anxiety is that low level anxiety that pushes us forward, makes us
Yeah.
get out of bed, makes us go to the bathroom, do all of
Right.
these necessary things. But sometimes it gets so ratcheted up because we're on that hamster wheel and we don't realize it, that by using that simple practice, whether it's taking a deep breath in, deep breath
Mm-hmm.
out, and saying, how am I feeling? What are my thoughts? So I'm leaning into one of the first big easy tips that you've given
Yeah.
to the listeners today, of just slowing down and
Yeah.
notice, what are your feelings?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's interesting. I created these reflection cards, um, that are based on a feeling, thought, mindset, energy, and action paradigm.
Yeah.
And these, I call them the imperfect love reflection and oracle cards. They help you realize that if you stop that sequence
Mm-hmm.
anywhere along the way, if you just stop, let's say you're having an argument with someone and you stop and you go, wait a second, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
What are the thoughts that led me to feel that way?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, just as an aside, my husband and I had little a little issue, I think you would call it
A thing.
a thing, a thing where I said, honey, that made me feel hurt. And he went
Yeah.
straight to the cognitive place
Yeah.
instead of saying, wait a second. Oh, I see I
Yeah.
hear that you're hurt. And when we can stop right there and lean in, if we can use that I message to say, I feel hurt, or I feel
Yeah.
sad, or I feel scared, but to say that we first need to be able to slow it down
Yeah.
and say, I'm feeling stressed right now, or I'm feeling anxious right now, and then communicate that to either the other person, or if we're alone, we're then able to communicate it to ourselves.
Yeah.
So that slowing down, is that the mindfulness piece you're talking about? That slowing down to take a pulse of your
Yeah.
feelings and thoughts?
Yeah, it's take a pulse of that, take inventory, notice what your role is in something. And what you just kind of made me think of was like Sue Johnson emotionally focused therapy with, with couples. And I'll use like a tap out word a lot, because what we're trying to do is just break the cycle. And so like a word that's just not related to anything else. So neurologically, you're not thinking of like love or basketball, but like rather you're thinking of something really like obscure, like a dinosaur, or, just to help couples kind of get out and be like, oh, right, let me pause for a second. You just said dinosaur. So we're going to pause. What's going on? Let's label it. Let's name it. And then we can kind of we can have the conversation, rather than the dance that's usually created in, in couples, where then, in that example, your husband could have escalated because he went to the cognitive, and then you would have escalated because you're like, well, no, you're not hearing me. uh, yes. So we just break the dance.
We break the dance, which also breaks the anxiety.
Exactly.
And taking it to our listeners' question, we don't know, or issue, we don't know if this is affecting romantic relationships or friendships, daily life. Generally, anxiety affects everything
Yeah.
because it permeates one's life. But when we realize that now you've given us a second tool, thank you very much, of seeing, creating an image
Yeah.
that is yours and yours alone, or one that you co-create with your partner or your friend. And you might say elephant,
Yes,
you
exactly.
might say bluebird, whatever it is that helps you, because as you're saying, neurobiologically, when we're on that fear
Mm-mm.
highway that's taken us to fight, flight, sometimes
Yeah.
freeze, appease, we need to stop it. We need to learn a stop sign
Yeah.
that helps us slow down, take that deep breath in, deep breath out, and reset.
Yeah.
So thank you. You've already given us two fabulous tips. All right.
Hopefully there's
So
more. Uh-oh.
we will find more, because listeners, Dr. Pete also has some amazing resources. So if we can just talk for a second about your two resources that you created to help with anxiety and help with mindfulness, so that maybe we can refer to those now and again.
Yeah. Yeah. So to your listeners' point about trying calm, trying meditation, trying to become calm. One of the things about third wave cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where mindfulness and meditation lives, is actually there's no goal. And that is so hard for anybody to embrace, especially like high performers I work with, because we all have goals, but the goal is just to be. And what to be means sometimes you're going to be dysregulated, sometimes you're going to be regulated, sometimes you're going to be happy, sometimes you're going to be sad. And so um, the mindfulness workbook for beginners actually is like one of the only, which is weird because like the publishers said this and I was like, oh, I don't like that kind of talk. Everything in the world of sports, like this is the best. It's not the best book, but it's one of the only books that's general mindfulness. Most of the books that are out there are mindfulness for eating disorders, mindfulness for anxiety, mindfulness for a specific kind of challenge that somebody has. So this workbook is really just global for anybody that's trying to integrate a practice in their life, so that it's, again, it's not, it doesn't have to be spiritual, it doesn't have to be religious, it doesn't have to be formal. In the book I write a lot about like how you can do this informally, just by brushing your teeth can be mindfulness, if you do that with intention in the moment without judgment. And because our brain wants to judge everything, that's anxiety. It's like it's wired to do that. It needs to judge the person that's in front of them and judge everyone that's around them, judge their environment. And so your listener that's trying to seek calm is actually what you want to let that go. You want the intention, you want to just practice just to be, just practice mindfulness, just practice meditation, just practice yoga, whatever it is that you find. Because it could be any of the things that you said, right? It could be therapy, it could be yoga, it could be meditation. It could also be hiking. It could be, sport. It's lots of different things, but you don't want to have this like seeking of calm. You just want to be.
You're making me smile very much because I'm thinking of my yoga mat. I actually painted on it. It's this great Manduka mat. Oops. Um, anyway, love Manduka mats, but I painted on it, be here, be now, be
Yeah, yeah.
love,
I love
to
that.
remind me that even when we're doing yoga, which is, not
Yeah,
we don't want to be in a place of thought. There can be so much judgment or so much moving to, well, when I'm done with yoga, I need to go do XYZ.
yeah.
When we practice being here, being now, we do that piece you're talking about where we're not striving, we are just appreciating
Right,
being in that space. And I love that you pointed to the listener's question where there's the idea of help me be calm.
right.
So then we've automatically created more of a striving mindset.
Correct.
Whereas if our listener, giving her another tip and our listeners other tips, if we do a just simple, I love using mindfulness in daily activities to slow down, as
Yes.
you were saying, brushing your teeth,
Yeah.
washing the dishes. For me,
Mhm.
it's vacuuming the floor or sweeping the floor. I love to clean
Yeah,
because it is one of the few times that I can
yeah,
really, or going for a walk or a hike, where my brain can stop and
yeah,
I can just enjoy that repetitive movement of sweeping or folding clothes and all of
yeah,
those basic things our ancestors did
yeah.
for thousands and thousands of years. They weren't constantly striving. They
No.
were just being in this place of flow. And I personally think that our systems miss that very much because, on some level, we carry our ancestors with us, and we know,
Yeah.
especially those of us who are Luddites at heart, we know that there was a lifetime in the not too distant past where
Mm,
there weren't all of these forces of do, 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 be, be,
for
be, be,
sure.
be.
Yeah. Well, and they were just striving for, if anything, just for a meal, because like that was the only thing, safety in a meal, and that's it. It was simple, and that's simplicity is going to come up a bunch of times today. So as we're talking and as we talk about mindfulness, because starting back with the study of the jams, like we complicate things, and listeners are not going to like to hear that, but humans in this life right now, we make it more difficult than it needs to be. And I'm not invalidating or negating that it's difficult. Social media, internet, things have evolved, and it's definitely made it more difficult, and our internal approach to it has made it more complicated. And so if we can just simplify, I heard a thing in my retreat. Oh God, I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but it was something along the lines of you really get to a place of simplicity and peace when you are working not on addition but subtraction, or when you've like you're done with it. In other words, because the addition is like you're adding more stuff to your house or to your, the things that you've achieved. But when you're done with subtraction, that's when you've really arrived and achieved.
I really hear you, and listeners, it sounds like we're going down the path of minimalism, which truth is most of us know that sense of joy and ease
Yeah.
when we clean out a closet and there's less there. We clean off the
Mm-hmm.
desk or clear out cupboards and donate what we don't need anymore. The psyche does take a deep breath in, and the body does as well. Like, oh, this is good.
Yeah.
Too much is, that's why it's called too much. Too, too much doesn't feel good. It's more to
Yeah.
clean, more to take care of.
Yeah.
And also, if, for most people, it's more to pay for,
That's right.
which can add stress. So, my goodness, you're giving us so many beautiful gems to look at, Dr. Pete. So, please continue.
Well, I like, so on your mat was be here, be now, be love.
Yes.
I mean, I love that too, because the thing that came to mind for me as you said that was how most of the people I work with are competing with the person next to them, because that's just what we do. You know, oh, she looks really good. Like she got into that pose good. And that's all. And I love when my brain does that, because I just like smile in the middle of class. I'm like, okay, and it's that reminder just to be there on my own mat. And so I hope that's what I heard, would like to be here. Like you just got to be in your own mat,
Your own
because
mat.
your own mat. Yeah.
And I think it's such a good visual and metaphor for life in general because most of my yoga practice is done with my eyes shut for that very reason.
Oh,
Because
wow.
when I shut my eyes, I'm turning inward. I'm not
Right.
looking at the mirrors. I'm not saying, oh, how cute or not cute is my outfit? How good or not good is my body or my pose or whatever. I'm just complete. And we do that.
Yeah,
And social media fosters that we need to look
sure.
like this person or that person. And it's amazing to me after so many yoga classes, people have come up and said, oh, I love your form and I love this. And I'm thinking, I'm not even looking.
I
I'm
don't even know what
just,
I look like. Yeah.
I know. And I think that that's a beautiful way for us to look
Yeah.
at life when we turn inward, not in a selfish way, but in a self-full way.
Mhm.
Listening to the body. Does this pose feel right? Does this
Yeah.
do the clothes on my body feel good? Does the
Yeah.
mat under my feet, the earth, and that is so much about because whether it's yoga or walking or just being at a desk, if we really tune into the body will tell us
Yeah.
when we are in flow and in good form. And it will tell us if we're listening, whether it's we're eating something or dating the wrong person or in a job that's not good for us. If we turn off that outside world,
Mm.
which is rife with expectations and comparisons, turn
Mhm.
off that judgment in the self that
Mhm.
needs. I have to bracket. You talked about judgment a minute ago, and judgment, listeners, is so important on an evolutionary level because it
Mhm.
allowed us to differentiate between good berries and poisonous berries,
Yeah.
good animal and animal that wants to eat us kind of thing.
Yes.
And but we've put it on steroids in today's world where we use judgment to judge self and others. And
Mhm.
so when we use mindfulness and that idea of just zen or being to use it to turn inward, and it's not a perfect practice. It is so imperfect because we're all human and we all get into that space of, oh no, I don't look like this or I'm not doing that. But if we can just turn it back inward and catch ourselves doing
Yeah.
that with empathy and kindness and reorient toward that gentler self.
Yes.
Do you have tips for how to do that?
Oh yes, I do. Well, well, because again, this is that Zen stuff. So actually, empathy, empathy with boundaries is compassion. And you have to have both self-compassion and compassion for others. And so, whether it's on the mat or whatever you're doing, and the judgment is it's going to be there. So in mindfulness, we're trying to get so non-judgment is from Kabat-Zinn, and it's like one of the main one of the three kind of main parts of the definition. It's impossible to not judge. You just want to get to neutral judgment. And so what I say, my example I give is like, this is the best episode ever. This is the worst episode ever, or this is an episode of imperfect love. And getting to that last stage of just neutral kind of observation. A lot of high performers or people just think, well, I'm not going to find joy. You find that you actually have more joy when you're able to experience in that kind of neutral area because the brain can't choose what to feel. And so a lot of us want to hold on. And I had somebody recently had a good performance, and I just knew, and I was like, okay, but you can't hold on to that either. And he just like tilted his head, and he was like, what? And then it clicked. I was like, just as much as you were letting go of your bad performances, you have to also do that same thing for the good performances.
Mm.
Because your brain cannot choose what it wants to pick. So I see you like that one.
I remember actually the first time is many years ago I heard that you can't hold on to joy.
Yeah,
And my instant reaction was, oh, no, no, no. I'll let go of anger. I'll let go of sadness. I'll let go of
exactly.
those. But no, I want to hold on to joy.
Yeah,
And they're all part of, our core emotions.
yeah.
The joy, the sadness, the fear, the anger, disgust, and
Hmm.
all of the thousands of feelings that come off of that. And I love to see when my first book, Joy from Fear, when I was working on that, I realized to me, which is why it's fleeting,
Hmm.
is that joy, like our other emotions, is always in us. And I like to see it as like a little candle, a votive.
Mm.
And as we move through life, it gets cloudy
Hmm.
because that little life makes it cloudy and smoke gets on it and we don't
Hmm.
process our situations and so it builds up and it gets dark and we've lost some joy.
Hmm.
But if we do that work to keep cleaning it off, and then our joy, because it's in there like all of our other emotions, then it flickers and it glows more. So I think we can find more joy by learning to do those practices of wiping off that soot that
Yeah.
builds up, the anger, the resentment, all that
Mhm.
stuff that works against us. It doesn't mean anger won't come back, but it means if we're used to using mindfulness to wipe it off and tend to it or be with it, then it's doesn't have quite the hold on us as it.
Yeah. Well, that's present moment living. Each moment is an opportunity to reset, and you have to reset. And I work from like a mind body spirit perspective, which is not nuanced. I think everyone knows that today, but having done that for about 15 years or so in the sports world is where it's a little unique, because I don't know that many athletes have kind of thought about their spirit. They might be religious, or they might do some gesture that's religious for thanking them for their performance, but to really connect with their deeper meaning. And I think that that's the gift and beauty of what I get to do, because the body part's kind of taken care of, and you've talked a lot about body today, and I think they're really in tune with it. That came up in my retreat as well, because one of my teachers was like, she was like, oh, it makes so much sense, because a lot of the people in your sangha, my athletes, they're really into their, attuned with their body. They know what they feel, and you said that earlier, and um, they're attuned to it in a certain way, but really getting the connection between that and your mind and your spirit is probably one of the hardest things, when you can, like, say, for example, listen to your gut, because that whole like enteric nervous system, and kind of understanding how much data is there, but we are so either afraid of it, or we haven't built yet a relationship with it.
Okay, listeners, Dr. Pete keeps using lovely words that take us into another direction. So we have two definitions to give you. Enteric nervous system is the system in your gut. About, we tend to think that the brain is king or queen, but brain sends 10% of signals to the gut. Gut is sending about 90% of signals to the brain.
Mm.
And that's the beauty of your enteric nervous system. It's this very wise center in your gut that gives us, and in today's world, we have learned to discount gut and go with, left brain or,
Mm-hmm.
prefrontal cortex thinking. So we've put gut instinct in not even second place. And I let's go to the definition then of body, mind, spirit. I'm body, mind, spirit
I know
practitioner
your
as
work.
well. Yeah.
I've heard. I know your work.
So we can see if you would give the definition for listeners who might not be aware of that beautiful interplay between those three parts. At least we have at least three parts of
At
who
least
we
three, yeah.
are.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I can, to be honest. I'd probably rather hear yours, but well, the one thing I will say is, like, I know that about you, but B, how much you use the word energy, and I love that as a psychologist, because I don't know if we do enough of that as psychologists. We feel, I think some of what we were built upon, many of our ancestors in psychology were very cerebral and intellectual, and that's the art of what I feel like I do, which is all energy based, and that's, I think, the most powerful, and that's the cleansing piece, that is the spirit that people have to work on. It has to grow.
Say
I don't
more, please.
um yeah, spirit, well, the spirit doesn't have to grow, but in order to live fully and to really connect and contact life, spirit is going to drive people there. And spirit can be whatever you want. I work with a lot of religious folks that kind of come in a very like Southern Christian kind of way, or we have organizations that are very focused on Jesus, or a lot of Jewish folks, and all different walks of life, and spirit crosses across all of those, no matter what somebody is practicing or what they believe. Spirit is a thing that is abstract. I love you said that's mind, body, spirit, maybe others, because one of the things I like to make people think about is, where's your mind, and you talk about enteric in your definition, but I'm like, your mind could be in your toe. Like, we don't have any evidence that mind or consciousness is in the brain. It sort of scientifically might make sense, but it's so nuanced, and that energy piece says it could be anywhere. And in physics, if we know that energy is neither, it's not destroyed, then It's probably going to keep going. Okay.
You said one of my favorite things. And it's interesting. Sometimes people will use mind and brain, and I've caught myself
Yeah.
doing that, using it synonymously. And you're
Yeah.
right. We don't know where mind is. It could
No.
be, you know, on the moon. It could be way beyond that. Who knows where it is? It could be in the, we don't know.
Yeah.
What I just think it's beautiful when you're talking about some of these pieces because we realize that this thing we call body, mind, spirit is so there are definitions, and we like the definitions so we can pin things down, but so much of what we're talking about, you can't pin down.
Mm-mm.
And for people who, and you're talking about one of my favorite things where people say, because I personally believe in something far beyond us, something
Yeah.
far beyond us. And people will say, well, there's nothing beyond us. And "Well, do you believe in physics and conservation of matter?" And
Right.
they're like, absolutely, I'm a scientist. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, then if you believe in conservation of matter,
Yeah.
what happens
Yeah.
to the mind and that sense of you being you when you die?
Totally.
If it gets conserved, where does it go?
Totally.
And I haven't had anybody give me a very good answer to that.
And if they do, they'll probably get a Nobel Peace Prize or something, right? Once they figure
Yes,
that once they figure
yes.
that out.
Listeners, if you know someone who can answer that one and appease me, then that would be fabulous. Please send them my way. I'll interview them and see if we can go toe to toe. Anyway, um, so you're giving us so much richness and depth and ways of looking at anxiety and stress. Well, we don't have to be run by it. We
Yeah.
can use some of these very simple, practical tools
Mhm.
to just catch ourselves in non-judgmental ways, being on this hamster wheel or whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
and coming to the place of, oh, maybe I can just look at my feelings. Maybe
Yeah.
I can just listen to what my gut's telling me. Maybe I can just stop striving in
Mm.
this moment and just be and sit and see what comes up with that, which oftentimes at first is a lot of discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is like it's not always meant to feel good. Every time you get on your yoga mat, it doesn't always feel good. Standing online, being in traffic, being delayed 5 hours for a flight, it doesn't feel good. And that's why that's letting go of the goal piece, in the striving piece. It's just being. And I know that's really hard for people. And it's hard for me. It's hard for me from time to time, even though I've studied Zen for almost 20 years and uh, with all of that, none of that matters because you still struggle at time to times where people can frustrate you and because you're in the end we're all human. You know, that's it. We're all just a bunch of protons, electrons, and that's it.
And we are certainly imperfect beings.
Oh
And
yeah,
I like the idea for our listeners and the individual who wrote in, if we can reframe things to see that we are imperfect, but that doesn't mean we can't keep polishing our hard edges so that life feels more joyful. Life feels more balanced and ease. And as you said, there are times I was at the dentist a couple weeks ago and he said, "Oh my God, you're the best patient ever. No painkillers and you're just like breathing and just so calm."
yeah.
And in that place, absolutely, I can go into this kind of
Hmm.
floating place where feel nothing, notice nothing. Yet you get me in a long line and my flight's delayed.
Yeah,
You might find me pacing and,
yeah,
I'll be trying to breathe, but especially if I'm hungry, I might not be my best self.
yeah,
And so we want to realize that for all of us, if we can figure out the reason I use those examples, clearly the dentist office isn't a trigger for me. I've learned to be able to really be
yeah,
in that space. But an airport and missing a flight, not so much. So there's a trigger there. If we learn
yeah.
what our triggers are,
Hmm.
like which would cause, the person who wrote in, look at what's triggering you.
Yeah.
Look at what those underlying feelings and thoughts are that
Hmm.
are causing you the unrest, not judging them. So I'm imagining that your mindfulness workbook is going to help with this. And also you have, I'm looking, I mean, you have resources to help people get more in touch with what's triggering them.
Yeah, and yeah, because there's a meditation uh, journal, for people with anxiety, just to kind of build a relationship with it. Most people come into our office and they're trying to get rid of it, and I'm like, yeah, I want you. You don't want to feel uncomfortable. Cool, like we all want to do that, and what we have to do is just build a relationship with it. And one of the things I'm picking up as you were talking is you and I knew this about you, obviously, with all the work that you've done, but imperfect. I don't. It's a good word. Like, it's not a bad word. And yeah, okay, because it's like, it's one of those things where I think a lot of people. It's like radical acceptance of imperfection is really what we're trying to do. Like, there is nothing that's perfect. I mean, I've found zero things.
Absolutely. It's why I wrote my fourth book, The Joy of Imperfect Love.
Right.
When we can come to terms with the fact that we are imperfect, our
Hmm.
partners are imperfect, our kids are imperfect, our friends are imperfect, and see it as okay, well, and some people will say, well, then you're giving people excuse to behave badly or to be their
Yeah.
worst selves. Not at all.
Mm-mm.
It's the acceptance of, okay, I'm not perfect. I apologize that I hurt your feelings, or,
Hmm.
I see I could do something differently. Let me shift. Or maybe it's
Hmm.
something with yourself, like the listener who wrote in and said, I'm really feeling that's the im the imperfection might be that this individual is feeling so saddled by the anxiety and the stress.
Yes.
Okay, so let's just work to evolve and manage it. You don't have to get to a perfect place, but let's get you to a workable place where you
Hmm.
feel more ease in your life.
Hmm.
As you say, we will never be free of anxiety. We wouldn't
Mm-mm.
want to be because it's there as a helper. Now, let me pivot to a question for you. You said, let's develop a relationship with anxiety.
Yeah.
Our listeners might want to know a little bit more about why you want to have a relationship with anxiety, because so many people want to banish it with
Yeah.
anti-anxiety meds or practices, and you're saying have a relationship with it. Could you say more?
Yeah, there might be a place for someone to have an anti-anxiety medication, and so I'm not going to say that that's never going to be, something that's a part of us. But to build a relationship with it, that's what the meditation journal is trying to do. Where every night you might think about some aspects of it, or just think about whatever it is that's kind of been affecting you in that moment. Because as we said at the start of this episode, anxiety has kept us alive. Fear keeps us alive. We want to be fearful. You don't want, again, we don't want to be, but like if I'm getting close to the edge of a mountain, I want to have some fear, because if I slip, I'm dead. I like animals. If I go outside and there's three saber-toothed tigers out there who haven't eaten in 2 weeks, I want to have fear, because I don't want to go up to them and pet them. So that's the kind of relationship, is understanding thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Says, when the train stops underground in New York, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that, it's the end of the world and you're never going to get out. That's what your thought creates. And then your feeling starts to escalate. But trying to build a relationship with the fact of like, okay, cool. Like, this is the person I am when I'm on these mechanisms, understanding who you are. Okay, I'm giving a talk to 1,000 investors, and it's my biggest talk of the year. Cool. You know, most performers have anxiety before they get on stage. You want to have some of that, but you don't want that to debilitate you. And some of the athletes I work with, they might not like flying, and they probably can't take an anti-anxiety medication because when they land, they might have to compete. They might not have so much time, and so the benzodiazepine might just actually impact their performance. So really trying to understand who I am in these certain areas of my life allows for me to prepare. And the more prepared I can be, the less anxious I need to be.
Beautifully put. And you're making me think of how in my research, which led to my first book, The Joy of, no, Joy from Fear, we look, if we break fear down to
Mm-hmm.
realistic fear, which
Mm-hmm.
would be the saber-toothed tiger,
Yeah.
and the unrealistic fear, which I won't be perfect, or I'll be stuck in this subway and I
Yeah.
will never get out of here. That's more on the unrealistic. Or my friends won't love me
Mm-hmm.
if I don't show up to the party, or everybody will hate me if I don't look perfect, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
might be. When we learn to differentiate between unrealistic fears and realistic fears, again, that's mindfulness, that's slowing us down. And we'll realize more often than not that most of our fears are unrealistic. The
Yeah.
huge vast majority end up in that unrealistic camp. So if we pause just to do that differentiation, not that
Yeah.
we'll always find some sense of ease,
Sure.
but we can realize, and as you were saying, with, having a speech with 1,000 investors, and if you're feeling really stressed and like,
Mm,
I'll bomb it, it'll be the worst ever,
yeah.
everybody will hate me. That's generally an unrealistic fear, but let's lean into it. Let's say you bomb it. Let's
Yeah.
say you fall down as you're walking out and your suit tears and you spill coffee on yourself
Yeah.
and you freeze and you don't have, and you start it exactly what you did.
Yeah.
People start laughing
Yeah.
because they realize that worst fear, even when they imagine it, it's very unlikely it's going to happen.
Yeah.
B, it's kind of funny to
Yeah.
imagine all of those things happening. And then it allows you to go, okay, so I'll probably do something imperfect. I'll probably do something a little wonky. Okay. It might endear people to me because they'll see I'm human.
Well, that's the anticipatory anxiety, and so we that's what we build a relationship with, because almost in social science nothing's 100%, but almost 100% of the time the anticipatory anxiety is worse than the event. And if it's not 100, it's 95. I mean, and this is just from that world. And so what we do also from cognitive behavioral therapy is we do like a conceptualization, and we'll do like a behavioral analysis and help people realize, because you were talking like people won't like me, they'll think I'm not smart. So we have to get to the core beliefs in all of us, and that is like the depth of CBT, because a lot of listeners, or even if there's practitioners listening, they might do journaling and cognitive distortions from David Burns and some like cute CBT stuff, but some of like the deep CBT work is like core beliefs, assumptions, rules, worry. So one of the things, you were allowed 5 minutes in the morning to worry out loud in front of the mirror. So on the morning of your talk, say all those things. Say them out loud, because you recognize that your worry does not impact the outcome.
Thank you. And I want to pause. I know we're running out of time, but core beliefs.
Yeah.
Would you pause? Because it's such an important topic, and we all have certain core beliefs that work against us and work for us. Could you give our listeners an explanation of what you mean by a core belief and an example of a healthy, positive one and one that might be a big stumbling block?
Yeah, I'd love to. What I'll say is, I like that you're trying to put them in the different boxes. 70% of our thoughts are negative, and so I rarely find positive core beliefs, because and I just want to, that might be hard for people to hear, but I think it's because we're so attached, we cling to damage, we cling to pain, and so we are really more driven by these negative core beliefs. And because internally we tend to be so much more negative, I'm going to start with those first, because I think that that's predominantly where people arrive in our office, from. And so the core belief it comes from schema therapy. So it's kind of like a deeper process oriented CBT work, that just helps people identify where they're having their most challenges. And so a common one is like, I'm not lovable. That's one you see a lot, because so especially in the work that you do with like imperfect love and thinking about relationships, like, you 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 might have had different attachment styles. If you kind of bring in Sue Johnson's EFT work, it's important to look at how you attach with your predominant caregivers, and so there no one's perfect. So parents have absolutely done something that made you feel unwell or unsafe. Like,
It's a
um,
truth.
like
Absolutely.
there's no book on how to do it. I mean, I was like in and out of the hospital from like 0 to 14, like all the time, because I was a third of three boys. And so, you know, burns and stitches and broken bones, and, but all of that stuff, could impact me, because it's trauma, and it's, I had to spend some of these like early times in the hospital. And but also it's made me who I am. It's kind of created resilience. It's also allowed for me to kind of build and understand some of that stuff. So that's where the core belief comes. So somewhere in there, it may have been like, I'm not lovable, or I'm damaged is another like common one. Because of these experiences, I'm damaged. And I always see that where people over identify with a diagnosis or with their emotions, and just trying to radically accept that they, are who they are. and those experiences have brought them there. And so we break down from core beliefs how it creates all these rules in our head. Because of this, I can't do this, I can't go there, I can't do that. And we make assumptions about the world. And then that always impacts our behavior. So we go really deep into like actually cycling all this out. And I guess I'm confident would be like a positive core belief, where it's still confident. It's interesting that I chose that one because confidence, I always like to say, is like grabbing water in the pool. Like it ebbs and it flows and you can't really measure it and you don't know what it is. That's kind of why I like it for like a potentially positive core belief, because you might hold on to that as like part of who you are. But no matter if it's positive or negative, our goal is just to acknowledge, observe without judgment, and then move on to the next moment and just commit to my behaviors without allowing those things driving your behavior.
Beautifully said. I could keep dismantling this with you for ages. I do want to take a pause, because you referred to attachment theory.
Yeah.
And listeners, this is such a beautiful piece because attachment theory, which came from research from Winnicott and Bowlby in the 1950s, really puts us in a place of accepting imperfection because they break attachment style down into secure and insecure and several types within the insecure style. And the beautiful piece is that even if your caregivers did not attune to you in ways that gave you a secure sense of attachment, you ended up in a more or less insecure realm. You can earn secure attachment
Yeah.
by doing work, whether it's in a healthy relationship or with a psychotherapist or group or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, because when somebody attunes to you and you learn to tune into yourself, that's where those core beliefs. So a kiddo who the parent doesn't look at them with loving eyes and say, I see you, you're worthy, you're good, and give those messages. A lot of times a kid grows up thinking, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm rejected, I'm unsafe. That is where those core beliefs come from. So it's
Mm-hmm.
nothing you did, listeners. It's not something you did. This happened to you before you could even speak in those pre-verbal worlds. The beauty is, again, is that you can do the work using tools like the ones Dr. Pete is offering today or working with a therapist to create. And I'm also certified in EMDR. So where I was coming from the
Yeah.
core beliefs that are negative in EMDR,
Yeah.
it's just one of the tools in my toolkit. We can create positive cognitions,
Yeah.
positive beliefs, and strive toward those that say, I am worthy, I am lovable, I am safe. And that, again, listeners, is such a work in progress.
Totally.
None of this is a quick fix. As Dr. Pete was saying early on, he's working on it in his life. I surely work on it every day in my life because it's a journey.
Mm.
It's a practice. It's not a one and done.
Mm-mm.
Oh my goodness, you're such a beautiful soul, and you have given us so many gifts. Are there any other pieces that you'd like to points that I know there's just so much more. We've
Yeah.
just touched the tip of it. Any other big pieces before I ask where our listeners can find you?
Yeah, well, I love the EMDR stuff, and I think that's maybe you'll come on my show. We'll talk about that because I'm always curious and that. So simplicity, I'd say one thing for listeners, just really think about how you can simplify your life. Notice when things are complicated, whenever there's clutter in a very metaphoric and physical manner. That's what we experience internally. So can you declutter and start with your environment, but also your mind, your body, and your spirit, and then uncertainty. Everything's uncertain, and that's okay. Embrace that, accept that, love that, because this is all we got. And so just to be where you are and be okay with the fact that we don't know where we are going.
That's the truth. We can set a guiding light, but we don't, doesn't, might not be a very linear journey toward that light. And I love that you're bringing us to a close on, again, on simplicity, because listeners, if you're setting goals for yourself, be gentle. Simple, steady goals, which is why you'll find Dr. Pete's links in the show notes where you can get his workbooks, his journals, because when you keep it simple, you are far more likely to succeed. One of the things we tend to do, I'll raise my hand, is sometimes make things a little bit too complex, and then we
Mm,
get stressed
yeah.
and we feel like but if you just have one goal, one tiny goal, or one
Mhm,
kind of big goal with lots of little micro goals underneath, you get to massage that and make it work for you. And if one of
mm.
those goals is simply being more in touch with how you're feeling and how that feeling or thought, the thought is creating a feeling or the feeling's creating a thought, just noticing that is a really wonderful goal. What do you think, Dr. Pete?
Just notice. Do it with
Yeah.
in this present moment on purpose and without judgment.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Where can our listeners find you?
They can find everything's official Dr. Pete. So officialdrpete.com and all the social handles are official Dr. Pete.
Easy peasy. Thank you so much.
Simple. I have to practice what I preach.
You do. Official Dr. Pete it is. And thank you again for joining us on Imperfect Love. It has been such a pleasure to
It
spend time with you.
really has. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. It is always such a joy to share time. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.